The void of space was silent and endless, but not still. A sleek obsidian spacecraft sliced through the darkness like a blade dipped in starlight. Its angular frame shimmered with the reflections of dying suns and distant galaxies. Inside, two figures sat motionless, bathed in a cold, artificial glow. Their bald heads gleamed like polished stone, their high cheekbones casting sharp shadows across faces carved with both pride and sorrow. Nira's emerald eyes stared ahead, unblinking, as if she could pierce through the steel walls of the ship and see the planet awaiting them. Her jaw was clenched, her fingers curled into fists on her thighs. Across from her, Sina sat still as ice, her posture calm, her violet eyes distant. She spoke first, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. "Do you think they will watch the landing?" Her words floated in the air like smoke. Nira's lips curled into a bitter smirk. They will watch, they will judge, and they will pretend to feel nothing. A pause stretched between them as the ship rumbled softly, its engines adjusting for atmospheric entry. Outside, the blue swirl of Earth grew larger in the viewing window, a primitive, chaotic world, untouched by the rigid order of Xandarian rule. They called it exile, a punishment. But deep down, neither of them truly understood what they had done wrong. "We spoke of freedom," Nira whispered. "That was our crime." Sina nodded, placing a slender hand over her sister's. It was warm, grounding. "Let them think they've cast us into darkness. Perhaps we'll find our own kind of light." The ship shuddered violently. Outside, flames licked along the hull as they breached Earth's atmosphere. Heat shields glowed red, warning lights pulsed. Yet neither sister flinched. Their bodysuits adjusted automatically to the G-forces, tightening like a second skin. Then, a thunderous impact. The spacecraft struck the Earth with bone-jarring force, carving a burning trench across a field of tall grass on the edge of a vast human city. Steam hissed from ruptured vents. The air filled with scorched metal and ionized dust. Inside, Nira and Sina exchanged a glance. Not of fear, but of readiness. The hatch hissed open. Outside, hundreds of humans had gathered. Men, women, children, all shapes and sizes. Some gasped. Others raised crude devices to capture the moment. They stood still as statues, eyes wide, mouths open, unable to comprehend what stood before them. Two alien women descended from the smoke. Their metallic suits shimmered in the sunlight, molded perfectly to bodies built for precision and elegance. Their movements were fluid, purposeful. They didn't flinch under the weight of so many stares. Nira's gaze swept across the crowd. Her voice was low but sharp. "They look at us like gods, or demons." Sina's reply was quiet, almost like a prayer, or perhaps something they've never dared to imagine. A ripple of motion broke the stillness. A man in a dark suit, flanked by soldiers in black armor, stepped forward. His face was pale, eyes wide, but he stood his ground. "I am General Ely Marcos," he announced, voice trembling slightly. "On behalf of the United Earth government, we welcome you." Nira's eyes narrowed. She said nothing. Sina stepped forward instead, inclining her head just enough to be respectful. "I am Sina. This is my sister Nira. We are here not by choice, but perhaps by fate." The general blinked, thrown off by her calm tone. Then, "Welcome to Earth," he said. We have much to discuss." As Nira and Sina followed him into the unknown, they did not look back. The air around them buzzed with tension and whispers. Beneath it all, a sense of something ancient stirred. This was not merely an arrival. It was the beginning of something none of them could yet name. They had been cast out by their own people. But here, on this strange blue world, something was waiting. Something neither of them truly believed in. Something called love. The facility was a sterile maze of white corridors and reinforced steel doors. The air was cool and dry, humming faintly with the pulse of hidden machinery. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like an ever-present observer, watching, recording, judging. Every surface was too clean, too polished, as if trying to erase the existence of anything unpredictable or alive. Nira walked beside Sina, her footsteps silent but heavy. Her emerald eyes darted from camera to camera, from soldier to soldier, analyzing, calculating. Her shoulders were stiff with tension, her fingers twitching near the edge of her bodysuit. She did not trust this place, not the people, not the smiles, not the peace. Behind them, General Eli kept a measured pace. He said nothing, but his presence was careful, curious, yet cautious. At every turn they were flanked by silent guards, rifles held just low enough to appear polite. They were not fools. The sisters were led into a small room, barely more than a box of pale walls and observation windows. A long table stood in the center, a pitcher of water, untouched, chairs placed with surgical precision. "Sit," the general gestured. Naira remained standing. "We are not prisoners," she said coldly. "No," Eli replied, his voice even. "You are guests, guests with unclear intentions." Sina sat down first, offering Naira a glance that said, "Let it go, just for now." Nira sat, but not in surrender. The interrogation began. A team of scientists entered, followed by psychologists, linguists, military analysts. Questions came fast, overlapping. Demands cloaked as curiosity. How does your ship operate? What is your biological composition? Why were you exiled? What is the structure of your government? What is the threat level of your technology? Nira's answers were clipped, often sarcastic. Sina, in contrast, offered measured, precise replies, gently guiding the humans toward understanding rather than intimidation. "You were exiled for having different beliefs?" one woman asked, confused. Nira scoffed. "On our world, individuality is poison. We questioned the hive mind, and they cast us out." Sena placed a calming hand on her sister's forearm. "We believed that strength lies in diversity, that true unity comes from the choice to stand together, not from being forced to do so." The room fell silent. General Eli leaned back, studying them. "What do you want from Earth?" The question hung in the air. Sina looked at Naira. For once, neither had an answer. "We don't know," Sina said quietly. "We were not sent here with a plan. We were sent away." "Then perhaps," Eli said, his voice softening slightly, "this is where you find your own plan." The session ended. The sisters were escorted down another long hallway, past labs, past holding rooms. They were given a chamber at the far end of the facility, simple, cold, but private. 2 beds, a small screen, no windows. Nira dropped onto the nearest bed with a groan. "Savages," she muttered. "They dress it up in manners and lights, but it's still a cage." Sina sat beside her, her voice gentle. "It's not ideal, but it's not the worst." Nira looked up at the ceiling. "Do you think they'll ever accept us?" Sina didn't answer right away. Maybe not all of them, but maybe a few. And maybe that's enough. In the hallway outside, 2 soldiers stood guard, Eli and Noah. Their eyes met through the glass. Unbeknownst to the sisters, they were no longer being watched as subjects. They were being watched as something else. Something new, something quietly, dangerously human. The days that followed passed like strange, dreamlike fragments. Time on Earth flowed differently, less rigid, less controlled. There were no collective clocks ticking in perfect unison like on Xandar. Here, people moved with chaos, spontaneity, and color. It unsettled Nira. It fascinated Sina. They were given limited access to the outside world under supervision. Accompanied by armed escorts, they began daily excursions into the surrounding city, a sprawling urban sprawl of sharp edges and soft lights, buzzing with unpredictable life. The smells, the sounds, the sheer noise of humanity overwhelmed their senses. The first time they saw a street musician, Naira froze. A man with a frayed guitar sat on a crate, eyes closed, his fingers coaxing aching melodies from rusted strings. The music curled through the air like smoke, imperfect, raw, full of something Xandar had forbidden long ago. Emotion. "What is he doing?" Naira asked, genuinely puzzled. "He's playing," Sina whispered, her voice full of wonder. "He's expressing." Naira stared, listening. Her hand hovered near her chest. "It hurts," she said softly. "Why does it hurt?" "Because it's real," Sina replied. In the marketplace, colors assaulted them from every direction. Vendors called out in thick accents. Spices danced in the air. Children ran laughing between crowds. No one moved in unison, no one obeyed a central voice. Yet somehow, the chaos worked. Naira gravitated toward a small stall that displayed handcrafted jewelry. Rings and bangles shaped like flowers, stars, and spirals. Not practical, not efficient, but undeniably beautiful. "These are imperfect," Naira murmured, touching a silver bracelet. "And that's why they matter," Sina said behind her. The vendor, an old man with a weathered face and eyes that twinkled like forgotten constellations, smiled at them. He spoke gently, like he had been waiting for them. "First time seeing human craft?" They nodded. He chuckled. "Beauty made by flawed hands holds more truth than perfection ever could." Sina tilted her head. "You speak as if there's meaning in every flaw." "There is, child." The old man's smile softened. "Just like love, it's never perfect, but it changes everything." "Love." The word sat heavy in the air. Naira frowned. Her voice was careful. "We have each other. That is enough." The man looked at her, not unkindly. "There are loves that bind through blood, through loyalty. But then, there are loves that choose. Two hearts, strangers at first, learning to beat together." Sina's breath caught. "We weren't taught that kind." "Maybe you were never meant to be taught," he said. "Maybe you were meant to discover it." They left the market in silence. As they walked back through the city, the crowds moved around them like a river around stone. And yet, something had shifted. They no longer felt like observers. They felt the edges of belonging. That night, Sina stood by the window of their chamber, staring out into the darkened city lights. Behind her, Naira sat on the bed, rolling the silver bracelet between her fingers. "Do you think he was right?" Sina asked. "About love?" Naira didn't look up. I don't know what to believe anymore." From the hallway, unseen by the sisters, two figures lingered in shadow, Eli and Noah watching again. Not as guards, not as soldiers, but as men standing at the edge of something unknown. Something neither logic nor protocol could explain. Something that felt like destiny. Midnight draped the facility in stillness. A gentle hum echoed through the ventilation system like a lullaby meant to soothe machines, not souls. The corridor outside Naira and Sina's room was quiet, until the silence shattered. Raised voices, sharp, clipped in the Xandarian tongue. Inside the chamber, the two sisters stood face to face, their eyes blazing. Naira's fists were clenched, her chest rising and falling in anger. Sina's voice trembled, not from fear, but from a building storm of frustration. "You don't understand," Naira snapped. "You never did. You act like we're still part of their system, like following their rules will earn us forgiveness. And you act like anger is the only answer, Sina fired back. This world is not our enemy. You are so busy resisting that you cannot see what it's offering. What it's offering. Naira laughed bitterly, a cage wrapped in smiles, guards pretending to be allies. You saw what I saw out there. Sina's voice cracked. The colors, the music, the people. You felt something. I know you did. Naira turned away, her voice dropping to a whisper. Feeling doesn't mean trusting. A sharp knock. The door slid open. Eli and Noah stood in the threshold, weapons lowered, eyes alert. Everything all right in here? Eli asked, scanning the room. This doesn't concern you, Naira growled. But Sina stepped forward. Her voice was raw, pleading. Number. We need help. We can't keep pretending. The soldiers exchanged a glance. A quiet, wordless agreement passed between them. All right, Eli said, stepping in. We're here. But whatever happens in this room stays in this room. They sat on the floor, 4 people from 2 worlds. No weapons, no walls, just words. Sina spoke first. She told them about Xandar, about the suffocating weight of unity, about how speaking a single divergent thought could mean exile. Or worse. Naira followed, reluctantly at first. She spoke of punishment, of betrayal, of being stripped of everything except her sister. Eli and Noah listened without interruption. When Naira finally stopped talking, there was a long silence. I used to think Earth was broken, she said softly. Too chaotic, too wild. But now, maybe that's what makes it beautiful. Eli nodded. Sometimes beauty comes from surviving chaos. Sina looked at Noah, her gaze steady. Why are you really here? To protect, he said simply. But from what? He hesitated. At first? From you. Now? From whoever would try to hurt you. Sina's voice dropped to a whisper. Even your own people? Even them. Naira turned to Eli. Her eyes searched his. You knew about the council, that they'd come. We had suspicions, Eli admitted. We've seen activity, signals we can't trace. We don't have much time. And still, you came here, Naira said, her voice softer than it had ever been. Because I wanted to understand, Eli replied. You? This? United States. Something shifted in the air, like gravity bending around a moment it knew was important. Naira reached out, her fingers brushing Eli's hand. Not romantic, not yet, but intentional. Sina turned to Noah, her voice barely audible. Do you think we're meant to find something here, something we never knew to look for? Noah smiled, warm and quiet. I think sometimes the stars send you where you're needed, even if you don't know why yet. They sat there for hours, sharing memories, dreams, fears. And as the night deepened, something delicate and unnamed took root between them. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was the first breath of it. Dawn crept in slowly, casting long golden lines across the stark walls of the facility. The morning light, filtered through security glass, painted the white room in hues that felt almost human. For the first time since their arrival, the air felt less sterile. Less like a prison, more like possibility. Naira stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the city beyond wake up. Cars moved like blood through arteries. People hurried past in mismatched clothes, faces painted with emotion. No order, no design. And yet, it worked. Behind her, Eli leaned casually against the doorframe. You always watch the sunrise? He asked, voice soft. Only since I started feeling things I don't understand, she replied without turning. Eli smiled. That's Earth for you. We're messy, loud, but once it gets in your bones, you don't want to leave. Naira turned to face him, something unreadable in her expression. Maybe I don't. Elsewhere in the facility, Sina sat in a quiet research wing, poring over human books and digital archives, diagrams of DNA, philosophies of individuality, early star charts drawn by dreamers who never touched space. Noah walked in carrying 2 cups of something hot. He offered one with a boyish grin. "I brought you coffee." Black, bitter, full of questions. "Just like you like it." Sana chuckled and accepted the cup. "You think I'm full of questions?" "You are a question," he said. "One I'm not in a hurry to answer." They sat together side by side, shoulders almost touching. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid, of thoughts dancing at the edge of words. Later that day, the 4 of them found themselves outside the compound walls for a supervised excursion, something authorized only after extensive negotiation. It was a quiet corner of the city, near an overgrown park that had once been a botanical garden. Wildflowers had reclaimed the paths, and tall grass whispered in the breeze. They wandered under broken archways, through vines, past forgotten sculptures of stone birds and crumbling myths. There were no guards here, no orders, just breath and sunlight and the sound of hearts beating. Nira stepped into the center of a clearing, where a tree had grown up through cracked pavement. On Xandar, she said, something like this would be removed. It's too uncontrolled, too alive. Eli walked to her side. Maybe that's why it's beautiful. She looked at him, really looked, and for a heartbeat the whole world narrowed to his eyes, to the steadiness in them. The way he looked at her, not like an alien, not like a threat, but like someone he wanted to know. Sana was sitting on a stone bench nearby, sketching the shape of a flower with her fingertip on the dusted surface. Noah joined her, not saying a word. He simply sat close, letting their knees brush. "You know this isn't allowed," she whispered. Noah didn't answer. He just reached over and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Let them write the rules," he said. "We'll write what comes next." Twilight fell, casting the city in a soft orange glow. The 4 returned to the facility under a sky that pulsed with silent stars. That night, in the privacy of their room, Naira held the silver bracelet she had bought days ago. Her fingers traced the imperfections in its shape. "He saw me," she whispered. Sana looked up from her cot. Mine too. They didn't need to say names, they didn't need to say the word. But it was there, blooming. The wind shifted. It was subtle at first, a tremble in the comms, a pattern in the sky, a distant pulse on the long-range sensors buried deep within Earth's defense grid. But for those who knew what to look for, it was enough. "They're coming." Eli stood in the command room, the screen before him displaying faint signatures entering the solar system. Unidentified, silent, fast. He clenched his jaw. He knew this was only a matter of time. Across the compound, Naira was in the training room, her body moving through Xandarian combat forms with precise control. Sweat glistened along the curve of her jaw. Her fists sliced the air. She needed to stay sharp. Earth was soft, but her past was not done with her. Eli entered. His voice was low, urgent. "We picked up a fleet. No call signs. Xandarian profile." Nira froze. "How many?" "Too many," he said grimly, "and they're not here to talk." Sina was with Noah in the garden wing, tending to the alien flora they had helped cultivate as part of a cultural exchange. She looked up from a glowing violet bloom as alarms buzzed faintly in the distance. Noah's expression had gone still. "That's not a drill, is it?" she asked. Noah shook his head. "They've found you." Minutes later, the 4 of them stood in the central briefing chamber. General Eli, no longer just a guard, but a man standing on the edge of impossible choices, laid it out plainly. "We'll try diplomacy, but if they attack, Earth will respond." Nira's voice was a blade. "They won't talk. They're not here for that. They're here to erase what we've become. You can still run, Noah said gently to Sina. We have shuttles, off-world routes. Sina met his eyes. And go where? We don't belong out there anymore. Eli looked at Naira. And you? She answered without hesitation. I'm done running. There was a weight in the room. A quiet, deliberate finality. They were no longer exiles, no longer guests. They were defenders. Night fell. The facility went into lockdown. Staff evacuated, civilians cleared. Only a few remained, those willing to fight. Nira and Sina stood in their chamber one last time. The silver bracelet still lay on the nightstand. The lights flickered as emergency protocol shifted power. Do you regret staying? Nira asked, strapping on her armor. No, Sina said. Because for the first time, we're choosing our fight. They turned as Eli and Noah entered. No more uniforms, just armor and fire in their eyes. Ready? Eli asked. Naira nodded. Let's show them what freedom looks like. And then, the first blast hit. A thunderclap from the sky. The windows shook. Lights burst in a wave of sparks. In the distance, a fireball lit up the horizon. The Xandarian fleet had arrived. But this time, Naira and Sina weren't alone. They had something no one on Xandar had ever been allowed to possess. A reason to fight that came from within. A bond forged not by order, but by choice. By love. The night cracked open with fire. A second sun bloomed above the city as Xandarian dropships pierced the clouds, trailing plumes of burning ozone. Sirens howled through the streets. Buildings trembled. The sky was a war zone, glowing red with vengeance, laced with shadows of descending death. Inside the facility, Naira burst into motion. Her bodysuit, now reinforced with Earth tech, shimmered as it adapted to combat mode. She moved like lightning, each step echoing with purpose. At her side, Eli checked his rifle, face grim but eyes burning with something deeper than duty. You still think this place isn't worth saving? He asked as they ran through the corridor. Nira gave him a sharp look and then a faint smile. I think it became worth saving the moment you stood beside me. In another wing, Sina and Noah sprinted down stairwells, guiding personnel to safety. Explosions boomed overhead. Dust rained from the ceiling like snow. Sina clutched a data crystal to her chest, the last link to Earth's fragile diplomatic hopes. But more than that, she held something even rarer. Belief. Noah grabbed her hand as a shockwave slammed the hallway. They crashed into a wall together, breathless. His voice was low but steady. We can still run, you and me. Now, Sina met his eyes. You still don't get it, do you? I'd rather die here with you, free, than live anywhere else without this, without you. They kissed, fiercely, briefly, then parted without another word. Time had become sacred. Each second counted. In the central courtyard, the sisters reunited. Behind them, the last of the defenders formed ranks. Scientists, medics, soldiers, all clutching weapons with shaky fingers. Overhead, the Xandarian elite dropped like silver blades from the sky, armor gleaming, eyes dead. Nira turned to Sina. Her voice was low, like the calm before a storm. We were born into silence, into obedience, but here, we scream for our own future. The sisters moved as one. The clash was instant and brutal. Nira fought with fury. Her fists shattered metal. Her body became a blur of strikes and counters. She moved with the elegance of rebellion, the beauty of chaos. Beside her, Eli covered her blind spots, sharp and efficient, his rifle an extension of her resolve. One Xandarian warrior lunged toward Eli. Nira spun, caught the attacker midair, and slammed him into the pavement. Thanks for the save, Eli gasped. Any time, she grinned through blood and grit. Across the field, Sina ducked under a plasma blade and returned fire with terrifying precision. Her moves weren't wild like Nira's. They were deliberate, calculated. Her mind danced through the patterns of the enemy, predicting them before they moved. Noah stood at her side, not as protector but as partner. When one moved left, the other mirrored. When one faltered, the other caught them. Together, they were not two fighters. They were one will. "Kira, duck!" Noah shouted. Sina dropped as he swung his rifle like a hammer, knocking a Xandarian off balance. She turned, fired, and dropped 3 more with surgical shots. "Nice move," she said, breathless. "You inspired it," he replied, eyes glowing. As the battle reached its peak, the 4 found themselves back-to-back in the heart of the facility, surrounded by enemies. Plasma lit the night. Smoke coiled through the air like ancient spirits. They did not waver. They had no more home to return to. So they made a stand for the one they had built here. Together, they surged forward, one final push. The humans, emboldened by their courage, followed. Earth rose to defend its adopted daughters. Laser fire screamed through the sky. Steel met flesh. Cries of rage and hope collided in the chaos. And then, as dawn approached, silence fell. The Xandarians were retreating, defeated, scattered. Naira stood in the rubble, breathing hard. Her armor cracked, her eyes wild. Eli stumbled to her side, blood on his forehead. "We did it," he whispered. Naira looked around, the sky clearing, survivors emerging from shelters, the earth still turning. "No," she said softly, "we chose it." And that made all the difference. Years had passed. Not in silence, not in shadows, but in light. The city that once trembled beneath alien fire now stood proud, rebuilt, thriving, alive. Towers of steel and glass rose among gardens grown from seeds both earthborn and alien. Streets pulsed with laughter and invention. The old scars remained, etched into walls, into memory, but they had become symbols of resilience, not ruin. Atop a quiet hill overlooking the skyline, 4 figures stood together. Time had changed them, but not the bond they shared. Naira leaned into Eli's shoulder. Her once feral eyes now carried something softer. Still fire, but shaped by warmth. She watched the sunset dip low across the horizon, turning the sky a molten gold. "I used to think Xandar was everything," she murmured. "That duty was all I had." Eli smiled and wrapped his arm around her waist. "Now you know better." "Now I know home is not a place," she said. "It is a person. And a choice." Nearby, Sina sat on a stone bench beside Noah. They were older now, stronger, wiser. Sina held a datapad on her lap, new blueprints for a diplomatic outpost that would bridge Earth and the remnants of the Xandarian diaspora. "We survived more than a war," she said softly. "We survived ourselves." Noah nodded and turned exile into belonging. Sina rested her head on his shoulder. "Love didn't save us, but it gave us something to fight for." Below the hill, children played near fountains that once flowed with emergency water. Trees imported from distant stars grew alongside native willows. Music drifted from open windows. Not just human songs now, but harmonies learned from a sisterhood that defied extinction. The camera would pull back now, if this were a film, showing the world they helped create. A world not built on conquest or fear, but on compassion, on choice, on the radical, revolutionary belief that 2 species could choose understanding. Naira turned to the others. "Do you think they'd be proud, the ones we left behind?" Sina took her sister's hand. "I think we became what they were too afraid to imagine." And the 4 of them stood together as the sun dipped low. No borders, no orders, no barriers, only love, only home, only everything they fought to protect. And as the last light faded, one truth remained. They were not the same as when they fell from the stars. They were more. Let us ask you, if you had to choose between what you were taught and what you felt in your heart, which would you follow? Tell us in the comments, what would you fight for?